we're going to be going out live and answering your service autopilot and business questions live here on a daily basis from 4 p.m. Eastern to 5 p.m. Eastern and 3 p.m. Central. Marcy says, good morning. Can anyone tell me to see how the actual revenue made in a week? We have pulled up all our crews from last week and filtered by completed jobs. Is this the correct way to do that? So I'm assuming, at least I'll take the first crack at this here, but if you're going in, there is potentially two different ways of doing that. So you could go into scheduling dispatch jobs in there and pull this up. And obviously this is a test account here, but you would be able to go in and pull up last week's data. Now that's one way of tracking it. I'm assuming that we'd want to go Monday through Sunday based on maybe any rain delays coming through, and we would pull that up. Now, if I was looking at it here, I would probably want the closeout day screen so I could see the start and stop times. In addition, if we go under the columns, we would probably want our product total and actual hours here and the total. The reason why I'm looking at that there is as we scroll through, we would have the ability to see how much revenue was generated, how much product, and what total of revenue and product. Because really what we're doing, obviously, there may be some markup in the product, but in my opinion, as we're looking at this, we would want to know the total revenue generated. You'll see with one of the pre-submitted questions when we break in revenue per man hour, really what we're budgeting on is the revenue per man hour. And then when we go under the gear icon here and dive into products, we're looking at the product of product markup. So if anybody is not using products in SA, given the fact that we do have some time to go into these things, let's say we had a 1 gallon plant, what I'm going to be recommending here, the way we tackle it at SimpleGrowth, is we're going to get this guy to open up here, hopefully. Maybe a little glitch in the matrix. Let's give it another one here. All right. There we go. Oh, maybe I'm double clicking. Let's give it a second.
There you
go. Once we get this up, we're going to have the ability to go in and it looks like we may have an issue, but once we get in there, we're going to have our products. Here we go. We have our product name and invoice description. Is it taxable or not? But what we're looking at here is, in our opinion, the way we want to set these up as industry professionals in the system is we would have our budgeted costs. That's what we're buying this plant for. So let's say the plant is costing us $10. This is a 5 gallon plant. And we would have our default cost, and let's say we're marking it up to $20. So the way we're going to be doing this is our product markup here is going to show on the actual estimate. So what the products cost us with the margin above that. So this is the way we'd set that up. Can't think of a scenario where we'd actually want to use budgeted hours on a product. So don't recommend that by any means. We'd also want to go into our income account. Where is the income coming from? And our cost of goods account there. So that supplies is going to lay up on your P&L up top for gross margin. But best practice if we're doing that is we have the default rate and the cost. And why we're doing that is to the question we had here on the Facebook group for Marcy is we really want to be able to see, are we hitting our revenue goals? And then we've already built in our product with product markup cost. So that's the main number. If I'm looking at it, I'd want to look at. So yes, Marcy, that is one way of doing it, is going into your scheduling dispatch jobs. Now, the other thing that I'd highly recommend is, you remember when we toggled over here and did the predefined date range here in this test account, is we went into columns and we set up a couple of these guys here with these exact areas here. And we clicked out, it saved this. What I would probably do is go in and create a view and put it in last week's revenue report or whatever it is. Now, conversely, the other way of tackling this here, and there's a couple of ways to skin this cat, is going into the report center and pulling up a pre-canned essay report. They're really, really good. And if you're looking at, like in our coaching division, when our coaches work with SA users and different clients, we'll have them as one of their scorecards on a weekly basis pull up the financial profit and loss accrual. You might say, hey, Mike, Dylan, Keanu, I don't use SA for all my expenses. That's totally fine. But what you're going to be able to do is, as an accrual basis, this is probably where I would also look if you were going to run that report without having to actually physically make it. But if you went in, you could literally go in and run the date range here. Once you have it, hit refresh, and that is going to pull up in this test account the revenue of $281,000 here. So you'll have contracts, and below that you'll have your services. So that's another great way of pulling a pre-canned report out of SA. Now you may take a look at that and say, well, Mike, what's the difference between accrual and cash basis? Because there's both of those accounts. So if you're doing this for last week or revenue, you want to do it in an accrual basis. And the difference between an accrual and cash accounting system is going to literally be the accrual is when the actual job happened. You may not have gotten paid for it yet. And going back to John's question before, we probably want to be running those cards at least once a week for all the jobs, so we're getting cash in before payroll. But in addition, your accrual is when it happened, not necessarily paid. Cash is when you receive the money for the services. So when you're looking at it, most companies for those kind of projections that she's talking about here in the question in the Service Autopilot users group is you're probably going to want to run that on an accrual basis. And that's also going to be an accrual basis on your closeout day screen. So two different ways to tackle that question off the top of my head. Dylan, Kiana, any other feedback or thoughts on the way SA and how we'd want to look at this inside the user group here?
Yeah, my only thought was just like, if you just look at the dispatch board, the only thing, in my opinion, that you'd be missing by doing that would just be if you do like a lot of contracts, like we did a ton of contracts, we might have not serviced that customer at all this month, but we still have a contract coming in for $200 a month or whatever it is for that client. So looking at it, yeah, Carol, or just looking at like the invoice tab, I guess, depending on how you bill, would be another way to do it. But
and if we went in, so the other thing, Dylan, I think that you're hitting on too is pretty interesting here as we're diving into SA. So a lot of times in these setups, and Kiana sees it a lot too, is when we're in Service Autopilot. Here, I'm going to just add a test client here in this test account. We might have an extra one here. So I'm going to grab a test account here real quick. But as you're doing it, a lot of people see, as we're working with people, Kiana sees it all the time for sure, it's usually the old saying, good data in, good data out. What we really find inside Service Autopilot is no data in, no data out. So that obviously is a massive issue here. So I'm going to pull up this test account here just so you can kind of see what we're looking at. But one of the things I think Dylan was alluding to is you've got to make sure, Marcy, if you're doing this correctly and you do have contracts, when we add a contract in, we need to be able to go in and take the income of, let's say, landscape maintenance and drop that in. Now it's going to be associated to a default service. So maybe it is, we'll call it shrub pruning, but it could probably be landscape maintenance. And let's say it's $1,000 a month contract. So we're going to put that in here. We'd want to put the billing day of the month, and are we going to bill a month in advance? But the last part that most people overlook is we go in and add a contract item here. And then this contract item is now included in this installment plan. So once we have this contract, it's going to bill $1,000 a month. So hopefully when we add up all the services, it equals to this total of $1,000 a month. And we're going to have a start and end date here on this contract. Hopefully it's a 12-month contract. But once we hit save, we now, when we go into schedule from the estimate, this is the same option that we're going to get. But if we have a lawn mowing service, we want to select the contract first. And then once we have that set up, we would select the service here in the account, and you'd always want what the mowing would attribute to. So maybe it's a $1,500 mowing, or actually it's probably a bad example, called $150, and the budgeted hours maybe is 3 hours. But we always want the rate and the budgeted hours in here, because otherwise this data is not going to populate to the dispatch board, like Dylan said. So you want to make sure you've got this data here, so those reports can actually run that. We're not just looking at the contract value, but if we associate it to a contract here, you're not going to double bill. So I don't, Dylan and Kiana, did I miss anything on that breakdown there?
No, I'd say the only thing, just going back to that report, something that we uncovered, I actually worked with somebody earlier about this. That report, it will pull the product totals, but only if they've been invoiced. It does not pull products that were used, so that can skew your numbers. So just something to be aware of.
That's why we got you on this call. So if you haven't worked with Kiana and the team, she is awesome. Other thing too, just to be aware of too, is under these contracts, you'll notice in this V2 form, the issue that we see a lot of times is you have to have a default service like landscape maintenance, shrub pruning. This $1,000 a month is only going to be attributed to that chart of accounts. It's going to supersede the actual service level account. When we go into the gear icon services, we have a chart of accounts that is actually being built. And this is, if you sync with QuickBooks, this is part of the issue as well. So if I've got sidewalk ice melt, maybe we're doing ice removal in upstate New York here in the winter, you have a class and an account. Problem is, if you are doing summer and winter work, or fertilization, weed control, landscape maintenance, all the income under that contract is going to be assigned to one account based on the service it's set up. So there is one way around that. If we go into CRM clients on the upper right-hand corner, it's going to allow us to toggle from V2 to V3. We're going to recommend not using V3 outside of probably this one screen or doing linear feet measurements in the V3 maps. Right now, not totally fully fleshed out based on from what SA is saying. But if we click over to the new SA, this is a V3, we can go in and on the client screen here, we'll click into that test account. And once we're in there on the far left, once this loads, you're going to have the ability to select an actual chart of accounts on the installment plan. So give this here. It's storming outside in upstate New York, so it may take a minute. But let's see if I can grab this one. It may just be the test account doesn't have any data on it too. So let's get that to load. But Dylan, any other thoughts on this before while I'm waiting for this to load up here?
No, I guess just, I forget exactly what our specific question was, but like depending on the question, right? You are right. There's 100 different ways to do things. So we need to start with the goal in mind and then kind of work backwards. From a production standpoint, quick glance as to see like what level of production was brought in. Then I think, dispatch board is probably the quickest, easiest way to do it.
Yeah, we're going to give this a second to load. But
since you're in there.
Yeah, in the process here on the far left here, there will be an advanced action. And what we can do is actually add and create multiple entries per month, and each line item will actually now be attributed to a chart of income account. So that's something, if you're using V3, that we highly recommend that you look at.